I realized something was wrong when I understood that nothing had changed. No explosion, no betrayal I could point to. No moment that justified the weight in my chest. Just the certainty that my life was happening with my consent and without my participation. That was the impossible part. I was not trapped. I was not deceived. I was not unaware. I was agreeing. I did not wake up one morning and decide to surrender myself. There was no dramatic decision. No line crossed in anger or desperation. It happened the way weather changes. Gradually. Quietly. Without asking permission, and by the time I noticed, the climate had already shifted. People like to believe that harm always arrives violently, that it announces itself, that it forces its way in. This did not. This arrived politely, with reason. With logic. With explanations that sounded mature and fair. And I accepted every one of them. At first, everything looked normal. We lived an ordinary life, predictable. Stable. Safe in the way routines feel safe. I went to work, I came home. We ate dinner. We talked about plans that were never urgent enough to act on. If someone had looked at us from the outside, they would have seen balance. To adults managing life. No raised voices. No visible damage. That was the first problem. There was nothing to warn me. I mistook the absence of conflict for health, the lack of chaos for peace, the smoothness of our days for mutual understanding. I did not realize that silence can be active, that it can be an action taken by both people. At the beginning, I was generous. I told myself I was patient, that I was flexible, that compromise was what adults did. When she spoke less, I filled the space. When decisions defaulted to her preferences. I told myself it did not matter. When my discomfort surfaced, I buried it under reason. I believed that love meant absorbing small losses without keeping score. I did not notice that I was the only one absorbing anything. It was never about cruelty. She was not cruel. That is important. There were no insults. No threats. No visible dominance. Just a steady narrowing of space. She would say things calmly. Reasonably, as if stating facts rather than shaping reality. This is easier. This makes sense. This is how things are now. And I would nod, because arguing felt childish, because resistance felt unnecessary, because I did not want to disrupt something that looked functional. I had learned early in life that being agreeable kept things stable. I carried that lesson quietly into adulthood. I became very good at understanding other people. Their moods, their expectations. Their limits. I was less skilled at recognizing my own. The first warning signs were physical. A tightening in my chest when I pulled into the driveway. A slight delay before opening the door. A need to breathe before entering my own home. I told myself it was stress. Work. Fatigue. Anything but the truth. The truth would have required action, and action would have disrupted the agreement. The agreement was never spoken. It did not need to be. It existed in the way decisions were made, in the way conversations ended. In the way my objections dissolved before becoming words. I learned to anticipate what would be accepted and what would not. I learned which parts of myself were inconvenient. So I edited. I softened opinions. I delayed requests. I reframed needs as suggestions. I told myself I was being considerate. I did not realize I was training myself to disappear. There were moments when awareness flickered. Small moments. Watching her decide something that affected both of us without asking. Hearing my silence echoed back as agreement. Feeling the quiet resentment rise and then settle again. Each time, I had a choice. Speak. Or let it pass. I let it pass. Because letting it pass felt easier than explaining why it mattered. Because explaining would have required admitting that something was wrong. And if something was wrong, then I was responsible for addressing it. I preferred the discomfort I knew over the conflict I imagined. I began to confuse endurance with maturity. I told myself that adults do not demand, they adapt. I adapted so well that eventually there was nothing left to adapt, just emptiness shaped like cooperation. People would compliment our relationship. They would say we seemed calm. Grounded. Low drama. I smiled when they said it. I did not tell them that drama is not the only measure of damage. Sometimes damage is clean, orderly. Efficient. Sometimes it leaves no visible marks. The midpoint came without ceremony. One evening, I was sitting alone in the living room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I realized that I could not remember the last time I had wanted something, without immediately calculating how it would be received. Not whether it was reasonable. Not whether it was necessary. Only whether it would disrupt the balance. That was when the thought arrived. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just clearly. I am living inside a structure I helped build that no longer has room for me. That was the break. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Structural. Something inside me shifted from endurance to observation. I began to watch myself more carefully. I noticed how often I deferred, how quickly I apologized. How rarely I stated anything without questioning it first. I noticed how she responded to my compliance, with comfort, with ease, with the assumption that this was simply who I was, and perhaps she was right, because I had made myself this way. The pain that followed was not sharp. It was dull. Persistent. Like pressure. I did not rage. I did not cry. I mourned quietly. I mourned the version of myself that once believed presence mattered, that desire deserved space, that love included friction. I realized that by avoiding conflict, I had avoided intimacy. Real intimacy requires resistance. It requires edges. We had none, just smooth surfaces sliding past each other. I considered speaking up. I imagined the conversation. It would have been calm. Reasonable. Logical. She would have listened, perhaps even nodded, and then things would have returned to normal, because the agreement was not enforced by her. It was enforced by me. I understood then that leaving would not solve it, neither would confrontation. The problem was not the relationship. It was the role I had accepted as default. I had learned to equate acceptance with safety. To confuse being needed with being valued, to believe that asking for space meant risking abandonment. These were old lessons, older than her, older than us. This was not a story of victimhood. I was not unaware. I was consenting. Every day. Silently. The ending did not arrive as a resolution. There was no redemption arc, only clarity. I see now how easily adults participate in their own erasure, not through force, but through accommodation. Not through fear, but through reason. We explain ourselves in the smaller shapes. We convince ourselves that this is what maturity looks like. I do not blame her. That would be dishonest. She lived within the reality I allowed. The responsibility remains with me. The agreement remains with me. I carry it forward now with awareness. That is the cost. I live knowing that silence is not neutral, that calm can conceal consent, that absence of conflict does not mean presence of self. This is not a warning. It is an account, a record of how a life can narrow without ever collapsing, and how a person can wake up inside it and realize they never objected. If you stayed until the end, I appreciate you. Like the video and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this.